this shooting, this killing, this death of a mother, a daughter, a friend should have never happened. And right now, they don't have a mother. Thanksgiving is a few days away. Their mother is not going to be here. We have 2 more birthdays coming up before the end of the year. Christmas. Mom is not going to be there. Mom was always there.
The knocking started softly at first. 3 quick taps against the wood. Then a pause. Another knock, louder this time. And then a voice. A mother's voice. Come outside. We need to talk. Behind that closed, locked door, the house was still. No footsteps. No reply. Just a suffocating silence so heavy it felt like it had weight. Outside on the small concrete landing, Ajike Owens stood with her 10-year-old son Isaac at her side, his small fingers curled tight around her hand. It was early evening in Ocala, Florida. The sky was losing light. And tension hung between those 2 homes like a wire pulled too tight. AJ knocked again, harder this time. Not out of rage. Out of fear. Out of frustration. Out of a mother's instinct to protect her children. Inside the home, 58-year-old Susan Louise Lorincz stood just feet from the door. She wasn't answering. She wasn't moving toward the handle. She wasn't de-escalating. She was listening, frozen in place, her 10-year-old son somewhere behind her, the air growing thicker by the second. Neighbors later said the knocking echoed down the street. Others would remember the eerie quiet between each strike of AJ's hand. And Isaac would remember everything. The way his mother's voice held courage and concern at the same time. The way she leaned closer to the door as if trying to sense danger hiding behind it. Then it happened. A single explosion of sound tore through the quiet. 1 gunshot. Fired through a closed, locked door. At close range. AJ's body jerked back. Isaac screamed. A mother collapsed in front of her child. And the entire neighborhood froze. Within seconds, 911 calls flooded in. Neighbors shouting, crying, trying to describe what no child should ever witness. What no mother should ever suffer. What no community ever should have allowed to escalate this far. AJ had come to the door looking for answers. But what waited on the other side was something else entirely. An irreversible moment that would expose 2 years of conflict, a community's fear, and a justice system already stretched thin. And that moment, that gunshot, was only the beginning. You're watching Say Her Name, the channel dedicated to telling the overlooked and forgotten stories of Black women. Stories that matter, stories that deserve truth, dignity, and justice. If you believe their voices should never be silenced, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so we can keep these stories alive. And tell me in the comments, have you ever seen a simple neighborhood conflict swell into something that felt dangerously out of control? Your insight helps build a community that believes in accountability, awareness, and change.
When Lawrence shot her through the front door.
I feel like it's a problem that's unsolved.
Those who knew AJ's family continue to show their support, still hoping the charges are upgraded in the case, even though prosecutors are trying Lawrence for manslaughter.
It's definitely a tragedy, and it needs to be done. It needs to be answered and resolved the proper way, not the way it is being handled.
State Attorney Bill Glasser.
Who was Ajike, AJ, Shantrell Owens? Before June 2, 2023 became the date etched into headlines, courtrooms, and her children's memories, Ajike AJ Owens was simply AJ. A devoted single mother raising 4 children, Isaac, Titus, Israel, and little Africa. She was the center of their world. Their comfort. Their anchor. Their laughter in the mornings and their reassurance at night. People who knew her called her a supermom, not because she tried to be perfect, but because she never stopped trying at all. Her life was built around her children's needs and dreams. She volunteered in their classrooms. She cheered on football games and secured ribbons at cheer practices. She packed lunches, planned schedules, wiped tears, and celebrated wins in their small Ocala community with pride. Professionally, she worked hard in the restaurant and hospitality industry, climbing her way to managerial roles, always imagining a future where she could give her children everything she never had. Co-workers knew her as lively, dependable, always smiling even when the hours were long. Friends described her as joyful and fiercely protective, a woman who would show up for anyone, especially the people she loved most. Her family remembers her laughter, the way she danced in the kitchen, the way she made space for everyone, and the way she held her children close when life got difficult. AJ wasn't just a mother. She was a builder, of family, of hope, of community. And she lived every day like someone determined to carve out a better world for her kids. Which is why that evening, when her children came running home crying, telling her a neighbor had yelled at them again, and this time thrown objects, a roller skate and an umbrella, AJ did what any protective mother would do. She stepped outside. She walked to the door. She knocked. Because for 2 years, tension had simmered. And on June 2nd, it finally boiled over. AJ's story doesn't begin with that gunshot. It begins with who she was, a mother demanding safety for her children. A woman trying to resolve a conflict that had gone on far too long. A voice that deserved to be heard, but instead was met with violence. And behind that locked door, on the other side of her knocking, was a neighbor with a history of complaints, hostility, and confrontations. A neighbor who claimed fear. A neighbor who felt threatened. A neighbor who had already called 911 twice that day. But what exactly happened in the 2 years leading up to this moment? What kind of tension could escalate into a fatal shot through a closed door? The answer lies in a pattern, one that the neighborhood saw developing long before that evening. And understanding that pattern is the only way to understand why AJ ended up at that doorstep, and why she never made it home. Long before June 2nd, 2023, the air between the two homes on that small Ocala street was already unsettled. For 2 years, the tension simmered, quiet some days, boiling others, until it became the kind of conflict neighbors whispered about but rarely intervened in. It centered almost entirely around one person, 58-year-old Susan Louise Lorincz. According to multiple reports and witness accounts, Lorincz had a long history of conflict. She complained often, called authorities frequently, argued loudly, and almost always directed her frustration at the Owens children. Some days, it was about the kids making noise outside. Other days, about them walking too close to her yard. And at times, about them simply being present, playing, laughing, living their childhood. Neighbors said she had a pattern: confront first, escalate second, and involve authorities when things didn't go her way. Calls to 911. Complaints to the landlord. Accusations of trespassing. And always, a growing sense of hostility radiating from her doorway. For AJ and her children, this wasn't a temporary annoyance. This was their daily reality. The tension was so persistent that the family tried, again and again, to keep the peace. But when someone is determined to find offense in every movement, every sound, every child's laughter, peace becomes a fragile thing. Residents later told investigators that the conflict didn't come out of nowhere. It had history. Weight. Incidents stacked like stones, each one pushing things closer to the edge. This wasn't an isolated explosion of fear. It was the end of a slow, hostile build-up. Still, despite the disputes, AJ kept her focus on her children. Kept trying to de-escalate. Kept trying to live her life. Until the day her children came home shaken, everything changed the moment objects were thrown. June 2nd, 2023, started as an ordinary day in their neighborhood. Kids playing outside. Evenings settling in. The kind of Florida warmth that clings to the skin. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. A group of children, including AJ's, were playing near Lawrence's home, just as they had many times before. And like many times before, she confronted them. But this time, it escalated. According to the children, Lawrence yelled at them, angry, sharp, aggressive. And then she threw objects at them, an umbrella and a roller skate. A roller skate. Thrown at a child. One of AJ's sons was hit or nearly hit, depending on different accounts, but what mattered most was how terrified he felt. That fear sent him running home, tears on his face, breath broken, telling his mother what had happened. Imagine that moment. A child, frightened, hurt, bursting through the door. A mother hearing anger in his voice, fear in his eyes. A mother who had spent years trying to avoid conflict. A mother who had tolerated complaints and confrontations. A mother who finally reached her breaking point. AJ did what so many parents would do without hesitation. She stepped up. She walked outside. She went to the door. She went to protect her child. While this was unfolding, inside her home, Lorincz was on the phone with 911. Her first call that day. She told dispatchers that children were trespassing, disturbing her. That she was frustrated and afraid. But that call didn't lead to de-escalation. It only marked the first ripple of what would soon become a tidal wave. When AJ approached the door, Lorincz made a second 911 call, her voice rising with panic. She claimed she feared for her safety. Claimed AJ was banging aggressively. Claimed she believed the door was weakened from prior incidents. Claimed she thought AJ was trying to break in. But the door was locked. Closed. No entry attempted. No contact other than knocking and calling her out. And outside that door, framed by the dimming light of an Ocala evening, stood AJ and her son. Inside, tension swelled into fear. Outside, frustration swelled into urgency. The air between them tightened like a trap waiting to snap. Moments later, it did. A single shot, fired through the door. A bullet traveling into the chest of a mother standing on the other side. A bullet that ended a life, shattered a family, and tore through a community. But what happened between the knocks, and the moment the gun fired, is only one part of the truth. Because what followed, the screams, the rush of neighbors, the confusion, the 911 calls, reveals a deeper tragedy. One that would ignite nationwide outrage, expose systemic failures, and begin a legal battle that kept AJ's name in the headlines long after that night. And it all began with AJ standing outside a door she thought she could knock on and finally resolve a conflict that had gone on far too long. What happened next wasn't just a tragedy. It was a moment that sent shockwaves through an entire community. When the gunshot rang out, time split into two pieces. The world before the bullet, and the world after it. AJ staggered backward, collapsing onto the hard cement. Isaac's scream tore through the neighborhood. Raw, terrified, the kind of scream that never fully leaves a child's memory. For a moment, the entire street went still, as if sound itself had been pulled out of the air. Inside the home, Lorincz remained behind the closed door. No attempt to render aid. No opening the door to see what she had done. Just silence, punctured only by her own frantic breathing and the voice of a 911 dispatcher still on the line. Outside, Isaac dropped to his knees beside his mother, shaking her, calling her name, begging her to wake up. Neighbors rushed out of their homes, some shouting for help, some frozen in disbelief. Others dialed 911, tripping over their words as they tried to explain the horror unfolding in front of them. One neighbor yelled, "She's shot! She's shot! Please hurry!" Another tried to comfort Isaac, but he clung to his mother, refusing to let go. This wasn't a distant tragedy. Not a headline. Not a documentary. This was real, raw, and unfolding on a front porch, with a child as the only witness to his mother's final breath. When deputies arrived, the scene was chaos layered over silence. AJ was unresponsive, the bullet wound deep in her chest. Paramedics moved quickly, lifting her onto a stretcher, fighting against the reality that had already taken hold. Isaac stood nearby, shaking, his voice barely rising above a whisper. "She shot my mom. She shot my mom." Officers moved toward Lorinc's home. The door was still closed. Still locked. Still untouched from the outside. Inside, Lorincz eventually emerged, hands shaking, still claiming fear. Fear of the knocking, fear of threats she said she heard, fear that the door was going to break open. She insisted she had no choice but to defend herself. But the facts were already standing against her. There had been no entry attempt, no forced door, no weapon outside, no threat that required deadly force, especially not through a closed barrier. Investigators would later confirm the door had not been breached. That AJ stood outside, unarmed, with her son holding her hand. And that bullet was fired blindly, through wood and steel, at the sound of a mother's knock. When word spread, a community shatters. By nightfall, the news had spread throughout Ocala and beyond. For neighbors, the shock turned to heartbreak. For the Black community, the grief turned to rage. Another mother gone. Another child traumatized. Another moment where fear spoke louder than reason, louder than justice, louder than humanity. AJ's family rushed to the scene, devastated and disbelieving. Her mother, Pamela Diaz, arrived desperate for answers, only to find herself standing in the same place where her daughter had taken her final breath. For her, the porch became a wound, one that no verdict could fully heal. By the next morning, photos of AJ and her children were everywhere. News anchors recited the details. Reporters repeated the phrase, "Stand your ground." And civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump stepped forward, demanding that the nation pay attention. Firing a gun through a closed door is not self-defense, he said. It is murder. The case ignited nationwide debate. Was this fear? Was this bias? Was this an excuse used too many times against Black victims? The questions were loud. The anger louder. Before we continue, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and do you think deadly force should ever be justified through a closed door? Your voice matters because cases like this show how quickly systems fail the people they're supposed to protect. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Say Her Name so these stories are never forgotten.
I just know the gun went off, and I heard it. She said, "Ow." And I thought, oh crap, I hit her. And I thought, how in God's green earth did I, aim for that left corner and I hit her? I couldn't figure things out.
I so wish I could go back and change things so that she was still here.
When I weigh it out, and believe me, I find that, she's a victim of child sex abuse was a significant mitigating factor. And she has no criminal record, which is also a significant factor. However, we also have a tremendous harm inflicted upon this family and the victim's family. So what I'm going to do in this case is she being adjudicated guilty of manslaughter with a firearm and ordered to serve 25 years in the Department of Corrections. To the bailiff, please.
After less than 3 hours of deliberation,
All right.
the Florida jury convicted Susan Lorincz of manslaughter more than a year after she shot and killed her neighbor Ajike Owens through a front door. Lorincz appearing stoic as a verdict was read.
The defendant is guilty of manslaughter.
The week-long trial put a spotlight on the ongoing feud between the two neighbors and how it reached a boiling point last June after a dispute over Owens' children. Owens confronted Lorincz at her apartment, banging and cursing through the door. Jurors watched Lorincz tell detectives her side of the story, captured on video shortly after the shooting.
I thought she was just going to break down the door.
Okay.
So, my heart was pounding, and I was like, she's really going to kill me.
Prosecutors argued there was no evidence Owens was trying to break through and posed no imminent danger, and therefore firing a gun was not justified.
It's not a crime to bang on somebody's door. It's not a crime to yell.
Attorneys for Lorincz said she had a right to defend herself at the time, leaning into this animated simulation of what may have played out.
If someone who is on the outside of your door that is banging and pounding so hard wants to get in that house and they do, it is too late. And Susan Lorincz had no idea what Ajike Owens had on her.
Investigators say Owens was not armed. Lorincz did not take the stand, but she wrote a note to AJ's children last year, read aloud by a detective.
I am so sorry for your loss. I never meant to kill your mother. I was terrified your mom was going to kill me. I shot out of fear.
Family and friends of AJ Owens appeared in court each day and broke down in tears after hearing the verdict.
Oh, God, thank you, Jesus.
And outside the courtroom, a moment of reflection after a painful journey toward justice.
If you had an opportunity to say something to Susan right now, what would you tell her?
No words for Susan Lawrence.
Her mom asking the community to keep AJ's children in their prayers.
I find some peace with that verdict. I feel that although my daughter is gone forever, the children's mom is gone forever, but we've achieved some justice for Ajike. My heart is a little lighter, and we're now on the path of true healing.
Lawrence will now remain in the Marion County Jail without bond. Her sentencing is scheduled for a later date. She could be looking at up to 30 years in prison.
What happened to AJ wasn't isolated. It was part of a larger pattern that people across the country recognized immediately. A mother knocks on a door. A shot is fired through the barrier. And suddenly, the narrative becomes familiar. Fear. Threat. Stand your ground. Justifiable homicide. Another black life caught at the intersection of bias and bullets. Communities began gathering for vigils. Activists marched. Commentators filled news panels with heated discussions. And across social media, people repeated one phrase over and over again. She was unarmed. She was outside the door. And her child was with her. The fact that AJ's son stood inches away from the bullet's path only deepened the anguish. It wasn't just a failure of judgment. It was a failure of humanity. And it demanded accountability. But the road to accountability was not immediate. 4 days, outrage built as people questioned. Why wasn't there an arrest? Why wasn't this treated as murder from day one? Why was the shooter still in her home while AJ's children grieved without their mother? Investigators cited Florida law. Stand your ground complicates things. Self-defense claims must be evaluated thoroughly. Evidence must be examined. But the community saw something different. They saw delay. They saw bias. They saw a familiar hesitation to criminalize the unjustified killing of a black mother. The pressure mounted. Voices grew louder. The nation waited. And then, finally, action was taken. An arrest, charges, and a trial that would expose every detail behind that closed door. 4 days after the shooting, the community carried a single question like a weight on their chest. Why wasn't Susan Lorincz arrested immediately? To the public, the fact seemed painfully clear: a closed door. An unarmed mother. A child standing inches away. A single bullet fired without warning. But under Florida's Stand Your Ground statute, the shooter's claim of fear complicated everything. Investigators had to determine whether Lorincz reasonably believed she was in imminent danger, even if that belief was completely unfounded. Those days became agonizing for AJ's family. Her children grieved. Her mother begged for justice. Her name echoed across newsrooms and petitions. And the world waited. Finally, after public pressure, legal review, and national outrage, authorities moved forward. Lorincz was arrested and charged with a series of offenses including manslaughter, culpable negligence, battery, assault. Her self-defense claim was formally rejected. The argument that firing blindly through a closed door could be reasonable fell apart under the weight of evidence. The door was locked. The door was intact. AJ made no attempt to enter, and her son stood directly beside her. When the facts were laid bare, fear no longer sounded like protection. It sounded like negligence. It sounded like bias. It sounded like a justification that could have cost 2 lives that day instead of 1. In August 2024, more than a year after AJ's death, the courtroom became the place where the truth had to stand alone, where every minute of conflict, every call, every knock, every word spoken on 911 recordings was played back before a jury. The prosecution emphasized what mattered most. AJ didn't force entry. Lorincz fired without visual confirmation. The child next to AJ was in direct line of fire. The dispute had a long, documented history of hostility and escalation initiated by Lorincz. And deadly force was used when no deadly threat existed. Neighbors testified about prior incidents. The children recounted what happened that day. 911 recordings revealed the growing panic inside Lorinc's home. But panic alone is not a death sentence someone else must pay. When Lorincz took the stand, she repeated her fear. Her trembling voice described banging on the door, perceived threats, a belief that the door would break. But her words were contradicted by physical evidence and eyewitness accounts. Fear may be human, but fear does not equal justification. And fear cannot excuse firing a gun at a mother through a barrier she never tried to cross. In the end, the jury delivered the verdict AJ's family had prayed for. Guilty. On all major counts. The courtroom exhaled. Her family wept. Her children, still young, received the closest thing to justice the system could offer them. But justice, in cases like this, never feels complete. It never returns the mother who sang to them. Never replaces the arms that tucked them in. Never restores the life AJ fought so hard to build. And so the question remained, what do we do with a tragedy like this? What do we learn from it? How do we prevent it from happening again? AJ's story forces us to confront difficult truths. It reveals the cracks in stand your ground laws, where subjective fear can override objective reality, creating room for lethal decisions made too quickly, without restraint, without necessity. It exposes how racial bias shapes perception of threat. How a black mother knocking on a door can be interpreted as danger, while the person inside holding the gun is treated as a victim of their own imagination. It underscores the fragile nature of community relations, how unresolved conflict, unaddressed hostility, and unchecked escalation can turn ordinary disputes into irreversible tragedy. It highlights the need for responsible gun ownership, understanding that pulling a trigger is final, permanent, and devastating far beyond the moment itself. And it teaches us that families affected by violence need not only justice in the courtroom, but healing outside of it. Mental health support, community stability, and the reassurance that their loved one will not be forgotten. These aren't political issues. They're human issues. Issues that shape whether people feel safe in their homes, safe in their neighborhoods, safe just knocking on a door. And they're issues that demand attention, reform, and courage to confront. When the trial ended, the headlines moved on. But AJ's legacy did not. Her mother, Pamela Diaz, created a non-profit called Standing in the Gap, a fund dedicated to supporting families affected by racially motivated violence. They provide financial aid, counseling, and community resources carved from the very pain they endured. Her children carry her memory in everything they do. Her daughter Africa inherited her resilience. Her sons carry her protectiveness and warmth. And every milestone they reach now comes with a shadow, one that reminds them she should be here. AJ's story has also reached national audiences. It was featured in the Netflix documentary, The Perfect Neighbor, exposing the deeper societal issues that led to her death. Through storytelling, her name echoes louder, ensuring that her life is not reduced to a single tragic moment but remembered for the love and strength she carried every day. Ajike Shantrell Owens was more than a mother who died at a doorway. She was a woman who lived with intention. She was joy, she was courage, she was family. And even in death, she is a voice demanding we do better. If this story moved you, say her name in the comments. Let the world see it. Let her children see it. Let her memory be carried by people who refuse to let her story fade. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how easily a life can be taken, and how important these conversations are. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Say Her Name, where we honor Black women whose stories deserve justice, dignity, and remembrance. Because AJ deserved a safe neighborhood. She deserved a respectful conversation. She deserved to grow old watching her children grow up. And today, we say her name because silence was never an option. Ajike, AJ, Shantrell Owens.